It's time for some more role-playing advice, and I'm heading into uncharted waters for myself. It's time to talk about elves. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether you like pointy ears or a superiority complex, I'm here to help you with everything. Quickly, look over here. It's a cleverly disguised promotion talk. Yes, I'm here to obviously thank you for watching me. I hope some of you actually get some inspiration from my content. That's actually the best I can hope for. That's why I do this. Thank you for watching. Don't hesitate to spread the eternal word of my glory to your friends, family, loved one, hate ones. I don't care. Just spread the good word. Thank you very much, and let's get on with the show for today. The time has come for me to talk about elves and role-playing, and this is a bit difficult for me because I've never played an elf and I'm not easily inclined to do so. There are certain aspects of how most elves are described in lore that don't appeal to me. Part of it might be their longevity and how this makes them react to the world around them. So I think when playing an elf, one of the races in Dungeons and Dragons that gets to be the oldest, that has the longest lifespan, if not the longest lifespan. And this has an effect on how you play your elf, I think. And there you could just say, oh Sam, you can just play a young elf and then it's not really a bother. Yes, but then why would I play an elf? Oh, damn it. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about elves in general. I'm going to have a small sidetrack about the subraces because elf subraces matter. And I'll give you some plot hooks why an elf might want to leave their settlement, their city, their artist's cave, whatever, to head out into the world. Now, let's start with elves. When people think of elves, they're usually mystical, beautiful, slender beings that live in the woods, that have a strong affinity with nature, magic. They also tend to be a bit distant and aloof, and this has to do with their age, certainly, because when you get to live up to 700 years, or what is it, things are not the same to you than they are to races that only live 80, 90 years. Something that might be very important for a human to achieve might be irrelevant to an elf, because if they don't succeed now, oh, they'll do it in 50, 60 years or so. No problem, we've got loads of time. Before I get into the details, I'm going to refer you to something and I'm going to get shot for this. But if you want a really good image of how the age difference or the lifespan difference works with elves versus other races, have a look at Rings of Power. I would never advise you to look at Rings of Power for any other reason than this or the music. But the relationship between young Elrond and Durin really showcases this. Elves don't have a decent sense of time because they live so very long. And don't forget, in Lord of the Rings, in Tolkien's mythos, elves are immortal, so their aloofness gets a lot worse because they forget other things live and die around them. But it's really maybe you can just YouTube the scenes between Elrond and Durin to get a good view of what I'm talking about. Being an elf means you have to take into account how long you've been alive. If you're a young elf, as I said, you're still discovering things for the first time. So it's all new and fancy and you're like a young puppy running around the world, because elves do love to explore. At least the Dungeons and Dragons elves, they are really fond of exploring the world. So if you're only like a 70-year-old elf, you want to see everything. You have seen nothing yet. But maybe if you're older, let's say you're a 300-year-old elf, you've seen friends come and go. Even friends from other long-lived races, such as dwarves, have passed away at this point. And I think for an elf, it's always important to see how they deal with that aspect of being alive for so very long. Friends, loved ones, maybe even might just be dead 30 years from now, and you still got 400 years left on your timer. Does this make you more distant from the easier to die races, or do you just actively re-engage in friendships every time, because you think it enriches you to see all these different lives and what they value as something important. So that's two like big branches within the I'm an old elf, how do I play this? Do you keep some distance because you're kind of done with grieving your friends every time and you prefer elvish relationships? Or do you actually heavily engage in relationships with the I want to say mortal races, but the elves aren't immortal, but I'm still going to use the term mortal races, to discover more of the world and how other people live in it. And I cannot stress enough that the age thing to me is very important as an elf, because what have you done in this time? Again, young elves, you're kind of a human that's still in puppy mode. But if you're an old elf, there might be some craft that you have mastered. You know, a character can start with some woodworking proficiency, and if you're Bob the human fighter who's just started adventuring, fine. But if you're Agalion the elf who has been in his city for the last 200 years obsessing over his hobbies, sure, you might be new at the whole fighting and adventuring thing, but the things that you craft, even when it's a bad craft, I think are of superior beauty to other races trying the same thing. So try to express your experience in the areas where you can, role-playing wise. The age also means that you might have witnessed certain historical events in your Dungeon Master's world. You can check with them. Look, I've been alive for 350 years. Has something happened in those past years that my character might have been involved in, because this is my story hook, these are my interests, this is why I leave my city now and then. And that could be cool if you're entering negotiations. There's a war council going on, and they're talking about the ancient war against the orcs that has been going on for 150 years, and they say, oh, it happened so and so, and you're like, no, that's actually not true, I was there, and this happened, and that human was really good, and he was actually an ass. It allows for some fun role-playing hooks, and that is what we're here for today. So I don't want to say playing an elf is playing age, but it allows for so many options that the shorter lived races just don't have to that extent. Elves have many sub-races. There's obviously other races with sub-races as well. Dwarves, hill dwarves, mountain dwarves, and dvergar. But I think they, especially like mountain dwarves, hill dwarves, differ less from each other than all the elf options that you have. I mean, there's water elves, there's the Eladrin, which come from the Fey realm, there's the Shadarkai, who come from another plane, whose name I forget, and they're quite different. They're not just dwarves with a slightly different hue of beard color. They have very different ways of living. Even like a high elf versus a sylvan elf, there's going to be differences here. And it is going to be up to you to decide whether you want to play into those differences or you're playing an elf that is a bit different. Wood elves, for example, are always known for being those stealthy nature types. You know, the best ranger is probably a wood elf. Maybe you're a clumsy wood elf. Not as agile as your kin. So maybe you took a different path because of that. Maybe you became a paladin because stealth is kind of overrated when you're wearing heavy armor. Or maybe you just lean really heavily into these stereotypes that go with your subrace and create the ultimate wood elf. Yes, you are the stealthy ranger with a strong bond with nature. You have a loyal animal companion from the forest where you grew up, and when this one dies you will go back to the forest where you grew up to get a new animal, let's say wolf, that is related to your previous one, because you want to keep the connection going between animals and yourself. Stuff like that, you know, small things like that really help you differentiate your health subrace. Something else that elves do, and that's probably again related to the age, they tend to be a bit uppity about things. Like, they can be impressed with what the other mortal races can achieve, but they're often putting into perspective against, like, well, us as elves, we can probably do better because they have more time. Even though in the player's handbook they do admit that, for example, dwarven craftsmanship from their smiths is almost up to par with elven standards. Even if in the paragraph before they talk about this elven city where the metalwork around the bridges is made by dwarven craftsmanship, and it's excellent. So dwarves and elves rather, will always exaggerate a bit maybe about how good elves are. I think other races can achieve considerable skill even in regards to what elves can achieve, but their progress might be a bit slower now and then, because in a shorter lived race, especially humans, like let's say you have 40 years of active craftsmanship and you have to train an apprentice to continue your work. Dwarves, I think, can obtain it easier because they kind of live like a third of what elves have in time, so they have a much longer time span in which they are actively improving their craft, and there is a point up to where you've mastered your craft, so then you can kind of, anyway, elves can be haughty and a bit uppity to other races because elven standards, especially if you're playing a high elf. If you want to be the uppity elf, play a high elf. Now that I've kind of vaguely sketched what being an elf is about, remember, it's age and subrace. That's basically where you have to look for your elf. Let's look at why an elf might want to leave the place where they live. Now, the good news is it's very easy for an elf to find an excuse to get out, because the Dungeons and Dragons elves all have a really strong case of wanderlust. They want to get out in the world, they want to discover the world, they want to see the good things in the world. They love art, music and poetry, so they want to see things that they can capture them in stories and poems and artworks. So there's really no reason for an elf to only stay at home, but they might stay at home to obsess over a new hobby. Going back to my woodworker elf, he loved going out, but he kind of lost track of time and spent 80 years perfecting his woodcraft before he returned to adventuring. That's very doable. So, apart from wanderlust, having the feeling that you want to go outside, maybe you want to fund that wanderlust a bit. So maybe your elf could be out looking for inspiration. You've not quite perfected a craft, but you're at the stage where you're not going to learn anything new in the place where you live. You've exhausted the books, the local elves who have kind of perfected their craft, and you're looking for your own accent to put into your craft, and you need inspiration. Go out and see the sights, meet people, visit places, and of course the most beautiful places are the most dangerous places, and you'll need some friends getting there. So while other adventurers in your party might have a specific goal to go to the lost monastery of some ancient order of monks, you just want to go there because apparently the panorama is truly inspiring and you will make the most wonderful painting afterwards. So you want to go out to enhance your art. Now, if we take the wanderlust to the extreme, there might be some elves who are just bored and want to get out. They did pick up that new hobby, they spent 50 years on it, and now they're done with it, and they're bored and they want something new, so they're going out into the world for two reasons: finding maybe something new to obsess over, and hey, what is the worth of living for 700 years if it's 700 dull and boring years? So you're going out there to look for danger and quite possibly achieve something cool while doing so. So this type of elf might be the one that is, while the rest is holding this war council that I was talking about, is like pacing up and down the room. Come on, when are we going? Even though he has the most time of everyone, he has centuries to explore every nook and cranny of the world, he will be the most anxious to leave and get going because there is so much to see, even if you have only 700 years. And maybe the last elf that I want to throw out there is when you combine the wanderlust with the desire to just do something good. I already said that elves value the good things in the world. Maybe you've enjoyed these good things for, let's say, 150 years. You've lived in a few places where life was truly peaceful. But you also know that life is not always peaceful, that to obtain this peaceful life, there are people who sacrifice their safety so that others may enjoy peace. And you kind of feel that the time has come to repay those who have gone before you. And you set out you don't know what kind of grand quest, but you want to achieve something of which you can say, look, now I've made this place a more peaceful world. Maybe you return to relaxing afterwards until you get the feeling again that your debt needs to be paid to the world. But this pure desire to do good, to keep the world safe, I think is something that can really play for elves, because they are so in touch with nature, everything that is beautiful, everything that is good, that they would want to protect this period. You notice in all of my elf hooks that there's nothing really materialistic. Elves will not be the ones who set out to explore new territories to found a new city. Elves will not easily be the ones who go out to look for lost treasure. Though it's possible, if some old elven artifact got stolen thousands of years ago, that you want to find it. Though it's possible you want to find the hidden hoard because the works of art contained in that hoard are said to be truly inspirational. Those might be reasons why you as an elf want to go out and do something materialistic, but otherwise I think elves don't really care about goods. And I think that is everything I wanted to say about elves. I know this is not going to be a perfect role-playing guide because I don't play elves that lot. I haven't spent as much thought on playing an elf as I have on playing a dwarf. So if you have any tips for me, do not hesitate to drop them in the comments down below. And I will see you all again in 2 weeks in the Attic Dungeon.